Thank you. I'm going to talk now a bit, as Phil said, I'm really focused on retrofitting and what we've done in this area. So I'm going to talk a bit about the background to it, our drivers, why we've actually done this and what we've done, what we've delivered, the challenges we face. I'll go into a bit of the technical detail of what we actually faced in terms of challenges, which may not be what most, if you're talking about new development, obviously shouldn't be an issue. The performance we're getting out of the green infrastructure we've put in particularly and other systems, and the outcomes that we've got for our customers and the environment. Some of the things that we've had to do about customer engagement, which has been a big part of it, and also our future plans, our bigger strategy for sustainable drainage for Welsh water. Very quickly, we're a not-for-profit. We're the only water company in England and Wales that's not-for-profit. And since 2015, we've been able to return a lot of value back to our customers in terms of reduced bills and added services. That's actually helped us because it's allowed us to take slightly different views sometimes, and we're under slightly different pressure perhaps than other water companies in that respect. I'm talking about Llanelli and Gowerton. It's on either side of the Locher estuary. Llanelli is on the north side there. Gowerton is a sort of general cluster of villages and townships on the south. And that headland on the south side is the Gower Peninsula, which is an area of outstanding natural beauty. It is an area with a lot of historical industry, a lot of mining industry and things in it. But in recent years, there's been a big effort to improve the quality. It's now a very high quality area. We've got very good bathing waters just outside. We have a shellfish waters designated within the estuary. It's a Ramsar site. It's a special area of conservation. It is, it's got an awful long list of features. And in the mid-90s, we put our first time sewage treatment in Llanelli, made lots of other improvements, and it made a huge difference to water quality in the estuary. And population served between these two catchments is about 114,000 people. But we still have a lot of problems. We've got a lot of flooding in urban areas, sewage flooding, so specifically water coming out of our sewage system, as well as there being fluvial flooding issues for the local authority for Carmarthen. A lot of CSO operations. Some of our CSOs operating more than 100 times a year. Water quality has been affected, and a lot of restraint on development. In fact, at one stage there was no development allowed whatsoever in Llanelli until these issues were sorted out. And just to give you an idea, Llanelli as an area has about a third of the number of properties and a third of the area of the neighbouring catchment of Swansea, but it gets the same amount of water getting into the terminal pumping stations as Swansea has. Llanelli itself, and a lot of this work will be focused on Llanelli, but Gowerton and Cymru, but Llanelli is the main focus. It's an old industrial town. It's an old Welsh working class village or sort of town, large town. And it's got lots of narrow streets, steep sides, hilly area around the side, comes down to a coastal plain. So lots of flow coming down very rapidly, slows down very rapidly when it hits the coast. So why use a sustainable approach? Well, we went back in, we were remodeling this area for various reasons back at about 2010, 2009. And we did a rough cut cost estimate for doing a storage solution, standard storage solution. And we were looking at £600 million for this area, okay? Huge volumes of storage. And just to put this in context, the population of this area is about 1.3% of the population of London. But the volume that we were talking about for this storage is about 42% of the volume of the super sewer. So that's the sort of scale of difficulty that we had here by comparison with what London is dealing with. It's just not a sensible approach. But most importantly, it wouldn't work. Storage of that sort of scale, we're talking about football. I tried to scale this in terms of Olympic-sized swimming pools. It doesn't work. Some of these big tanks are football stadium-sized. Okay? They will never empty. They fill up in the winter, they will never empty down. They will just stay full all winter and we'll have as many spills and they'll do nothing for us. So we looked around at international good experience and looked at particularly at Gothenburg, Malmo, Portland, all those sort of places, And one of the things we learned from that is that actually you can treat this not as a surface water is a problem to squeeze underground and get rid of as quickly as possible. you can make it a feature of the environment, you can make it a feature of the area. We were really impressed when we saw that. That's when we came up with the name Rainscape. We used to call this SWARE, surface water, elimination and reduction, typical engineer's name. But now we call it Rainscape, and that's a much better term to give customers as well, particularly when you're telling them that you're coming out to do some work in their area. So what have we done to date? Well, we've put in a lot of Rainscape work. We're about £40 million into our programme now. The total programme is going to be 113 million. Not all Rainscape, but a big chunk. That's just there in this particular area. We've done a lot of green infrastructure. That's the same picture that Phil had, but this time with some water in it, as you can see. But we've done other things. We've reduced the impact of the CSO discharges we do have on the shellfish waters. We disinfect them. And we're currently working on systems that will actually treat stormwater, treatment systems that will start and stop when storms occur, which biological systems can't do. So we're using a combination of things. You can't just go in and do everything all one way in an existing area. You have to be flexible. In fact, our attitude to this is actually building up a toolkit. I've now got a whole series of tools in my toolbox and we're using them, and Rainscape's a key one. And the things we're doing there, we're optimizing some of the existing assets. So these existing tanks we're either bringing back into service or improving. But we're coupling them up with other things, putting in a lot of green infrastructure. That swale up the top there is actually in construction at the moment in one area right in the centre of Llanelli. And that's a big scheme. That's probably going to end up being the largest swale that we actually build in Llanelli. It's about £4 million worth with all the work around it. And we're also doing some grey infrastructure. And in fact, what we're doing is we're linking up the grey infrastructure with the green infrastructure. So in this case, we had to go, this whole area was on a combined system, but it's right beside the sea. The thing that stopped the water draining to the sea was the fact that the railway line ran in between. So we put a tunnel in, we're actually just funneling the water out. And in that case, we don't need to do much more than just provide it with the route. But we're now about to start the largest individual project, which is going to cost us, between all the Rainscape and the tunnel, is going to cost us about £20 million. We're going to put a new 1.5 metre diameter tunnel down the middle of Llanelli and take all the flows away. It's almost like an extra watercourse, because every watercourse in Llanelli is culverted for most of its length, and it is full. Just can't take any more flows. So we're actually providing more capacity, but coupling up Rainscape schemes to it. Lots of challenges in construction, though. For example, we've got very narrow streets. And in fact, those aren't the narrowest streets by any means. It's an old area. It's quite hard to actually work in it. Parking is the biggest single issue for customers when you're doing this. You have to be very cognizant of parking. And just putting out your communications and going, tell us if you've got any issues about parking, isn't enough. You really have to do it. As you can see from poor old Sam here, had a bit of a problem. Services not being where they're supposed to be. Very, very shallow. Very difficult to work around quite often. And we had to alter designs on the fly. You can see that very first picture there on the left is actually where we said we can't actually do what we originally intended to do. And we were able to put in instead a shallow trough, as you can see, just under the surface of the roadway itself. Another challenge, we just talked about maintenance there. Who maintains these things? Well, first of all, we built one set of units that we built. We had early problems in. We built them in, finished them in autumn 2014. By the following spring, they were just filling up with water. They weren't percolating through or anything like that. We had put the wrong soil in. I won't blame our poor designers, because we thought, whoops, this doesn't look very good. Let's get it looking green for the winter, and it didn't work very well. And so we had to go back in, dig it all out, and put the proper soil in. And one thing we learned from that is if we're putting plants in to get them more mature, more established, it's better for our customers and it looks better. We are maintaining it at the moment, but what we're actually about to do is kick off a maintenance pilot with Carmarthen. And Carmarthen Council are a key partner on this, by the way. We're kicking that off. In fact, we're about to kick that off now. And the key thing is just about saying, right, okay, who's best placed to maintain these things? So here on this example, Carmarthen want to maintain the curbstones because that's part of the highway structure. That's their highway. They want to keep that maintenance. The inner part of it, if that fails, as it was doing here, the effect hits us because we're going to get more CSO spills or we're going to get sewer flooding for our customers. So we want to retain that. In other cases, Carmarthen as a highway authority because it floods the highway. So really, we're trying to balance risk against cost, and we're trying to learn about who's best placed to do that maintenance, which we think will actually be based on who actually carries the risk if it fails. That's where we think it'll actually work best. Another issue is about statutory powers. Right? We are a sewerage undertaker. We can build sewers, at least until 2014. We could only build and maintain sewers. So the very first swale we built, Queen Mary's Walk, we did using our statutory powers. We basically defined that as a sewer. Okay? And so there's a pipe underneath, that's the sewer, and everything above it is part of the ancillary equipment. It's fine. The second group of schemes that we built on a place called Glevering Street, we actually had to do it under Section 278 of the Highways Act. Okay, so we've done it that way. We have to do our commuted sum to the local authority. That's actually one of the areas where we're looking at trying to maintain maintenance, do the maintenance of parking, so we're still refining that. The final one is actually on private land. It was on a school, one of the very first schemes that we did. That's actually under a private agreement. Again, school very cooperative, council very cooperative, but we're reliant on that. You can't just go in and do it. How far can we go with Rainscape? Why aren't we doing the whole thing with it? And basically what it boils down to is some of the areas are really cost effective to do, but as you get into other areas where all the connection between the foul and the surface water is on private land within that curtilage of an individual property, you've actually got to negotiate with those individual property owners, and that gets very expensive. It gets very complex, and then you get a lot of disruption, and there's a big issue for affordability if we do that. So what we're actually doing is we're looking at seeing how we can persuade customers to disconnect their own roof drainage or allow us to do that for them, because we still think it's going to be cost effective to do that. And that program is something we've just actually, it's a project we're doing internationally as well. We're actually trying that in 3 groups of houses, trying different approaches for each of them and see what that actually tells us. We're also optimizing our existing assets. And as I said before, it's a bag of tools. Where we have to do, we're actually looking at other approaches like treating the storm flows themselves. So how's it working? Well, there's a number of graphs now I just wanted to show you. So this is one bit of our Rainscape investment, just one scheme. The green line over there on the left-hand side shows you the modelled flows that we would have had before we did the investment. The red line underneath is actually what we actually measured coming off, and the blue solid lines at the top were the rainfall events corresponding to it. So you can see it's quite, a substantial reduction, about 75% reduction there for that one. CSO impact is shown here on the right-hand side, and the big one is Station Road, which is quite a large CSO, and we've got less than a third of the number of spills that we were having beforehand as a result of that particular investment. This is Queen Mary's Walk swale, so we put monitoring in downstream of the swale. We've also got rainfall monitoring locally there as well. And what each one of those dots corresponds to is we measured the rainfall, we've got the model of what that area used to generate in terms of runoff, and we've calculated, compared to what was actually running off in that rainfall event, what the percentage reduction in flows from that area are. And each dot represents an individual rainfall event over a 2-year period. And you can see there's a steady improvement over that period in the performance. It's just a straight line, and actually when you extend that across the really bad winter of 15-16, you'll find that that line levels off. In fact, if you put a line all the way through, it's much less steep. And we'll probably find we'll top out around about the somewhere between 75 and 80% mark. And just to emphasize, as a hectare of area draining to that swale, and for every 100 litres of water coming into it, only 25 litres of water passes forward. Everything else is pumped out through evapotranspiration. And that happened from day one. We really didn't expect that. When we finished that, back in late 2013, went into that really bad winter, we thought it'd be wiped out in effect, because we had a series of twigs around the side of it. It was mainly soil with a bit of grass in it. And yet it still took enormous amounts of water out from day one. Really did not expect that. Another thing I didn't expect, I thought that the rainfall would actually the evapotranspiration from these units would actually correspond to, so inversely, to the amount of rainfall. Now, what this is showing you is on the y-axis is the percentage removal, and on the x-axis is the modelled runoff, which is my surrogate for rainfall volume and peak flow, the modelled runoff from that area. And you can see that instead of it being the kind of, you might expect a sort of tailing off curve with it getting worse as the flow went up, in fact, it was very good, remained very good. These odd dots at the end, most of these came from the really intense rainfall events and storms that we had in, over the winter of 15-16. But the actual performance, the overall bulk performance of that bit of green infrastructure has been excellent. And we haven't done that level of analysis on the other green infrastructure, but we're seeing those sorts of figures. In Clevering Street, where it's a distributed system, we're getting about 50% removal. But that's a much smaller green infrastructure area relative to the impermeable area that we're draining through. So what have we delivered? Outcomes for our customers are, well, we had 37 customers on our definitive flooding risk. That means they were at risk of internal flooding, 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 years, 2 in 10 times, sorry, in a 1 in 10 year storm or a 2 in 10 year storm. And we've taken all 37 off. We've got climate change resilience. We're 25,000 rooftop equivalents across the whole of Wales is what we're aiming to deliver. That's at the impermeable area, by the time we're finished this, that no longer drains to our system. And each roof, roughly speaking, is about 100 cubic metres a year. That's what it equates to. That's what we'll be doing across the whole of Wales. Reducing the vulnerability, particularly intellectually, to urban flooding. So even though it's not our responsibility, it is a downstream benefit of doing this. Growth is facilitated in this area, development by a memorandum of understanding, which is actually very important to this. It's a really unusual agreement that we have in this area. And it gives us the lowest cost and most robust solution. This whole programme there, it's still very expensive. It's £113 million. But if you compare that to the 600 million that it would be if we used storage, you can see how different it is. Outcomes for the environment. Well, first of all, we have removed about, sorry, I'll go back on to my numbers. We're taking out, in terms of a 1 in 5 year storm, we've reduced that flow by about 3.9 cubic metres a second. That used to run into that system, we're now keeping out of our system as a result of this, across the two catchments. And the total volume in an average year kept out of the system is about 1.5 million cubic metres a year so far. By the time we finish the programme, we'll have reduced the CSO discharges by 80% in terms of volume and also in quantity. Big improvements with shellfish water quality, greater, reduced risk for WFD compliance and for habitats compliance. We're pumping a lot less water. It's 1.5 million cubic metres we're not pumping and treating. And there are biodiversity benefits. We're not seeking to do that, but it so happens that the plants we want also give us the biodiversity benefits. It comes almost automatically. You do have to communicate and target your customer engagement. You can't just do normal customer comms with these. So we've really gone to town with it. We learned from some of our early schemes, and we are now targeting events in Llanelli and Gowerton, so we belong to the carnivals, things like that, raising awareness among schools and youth groups, talking to, and we've actually got kind of pop-up events. We now have a van that goes out and stops in areas and people can come along and ask questions. And we give them something back. We did a Rainscape community fund, and we're about to make a decision on who we're going to give out little blocks of money and block grants of money in the area for that. We'll probably do that again. We did an awareness survey. Interestingly, in one area of Llanelli, we found, in fact, only 20% of the customers were actually aware of Rainscape in the first place, which is a good or a bad thing. I suspect 20% is actually quite good for sewerage. But of those, 72% were aware that we're responsible for Rainscape. Most people said that it wasn't affecting them one way or the other. They didn't really get too much disruption. And these schemes are very disruptive for customers. You can see the way we have to shut streets off, etc. And 71% of the 20% thought that this would be a benefit to them. And our future strategy, well, we have a strategy which is about safeguard. It's really about resilience. How can we safeguard the impact, or safeguard our customers and the environment from the combined effects of climate change, growth and urban creep? Those three things together are acting together to increase the pressure on us. We've got about 100 sustainable drainage type projects across Wales that we're doing in this 5-year investment period. And it's really our business as usual approach. When we're going to do a flooding, when we're going to do new development, when we're going to do any of these schemes, we're looking at this as an opportunity for actually delivering that scheme. And we are aiming to do our 25,000 roofs, as I say, by 2020. We're well on target with that. But we're actually upping that ante for that in our 2050 vision, which we're working on at the moment. And that's going to be very ambitious by the time we finish that. We'll really be seeking to say that by 2050, we'll probably have the majority of our customers no longer draining to a combined sewer system. And I know you don't particularly want to ask questions at this stage, so we'll keep it to the end.
Well, if people have got a question specifically about Fergus's presentation, we've got microphones somewhere, and if you do ask a question, can you wait for the microphone to get to you and state your name and company?
Hi there, Fergus. Paul Blackman, Wallingford Hydro Solutions. Just on there's some quite large reductions there in stormwater volume through the Rainscape initiative there. So just wondering, in terms of the flow measurement, obviously it's been measuring flows and comparing there. Is that also evidenced so far by reduced bills for pumping?
We've not really looked at reduced bills for pumping, but although it's a big volume, in terms of the Queen Mary's Walk swale, for example, is taking out about 15,000 cubic metres a year. But actually, it'll only cost us to pump that to the works. It'll only cost us about 250 quid a year to do that. So by comparison with the overall pumping bill that we pay, it's fairly small there. It's not the driver for this. The driver is the fact that other approaches aren't sustainable, much more expensive, far more expensive to provide additional capacity. In fact, Brian Smith's here as well. If you look at the sort of things going on in the 21st Century Drainage Group, a key part of that is about capacity. And for me, that's what the real value in this is about a way of providing that capacity more cost effectively rather than being driven by the power costs. But the power costs are a nice extra. It's a nice little extra for us to get. It's not a huge value.
Yeah, sure. I was really thinking about more in terms of, another measure of the success, if you like, in terms of backing up, because there can be uncertainty with the flow measurement, etc. as well. So just a way of collecting another sort of evidence base, if you like.
It would be quite a complex calculation to do because it's such variable. These are pumping stations that cope with the variability of the weather. You'd have to do a very complex calculation to compare the two. And although we have a model that will do that, it's not an exercise that we've done.
Yeah, okay, thank you. One more, I think we have over here.
Thanks. Claire Thirlwall, a landscape architect and director of Thirlwall Associates. Just a quick question back to some of the stats you gave. You said you were surprised about the level of I think it was the level of evaporation you're getting. Is it possible just to repeat that? There was a particular stat that I kind of, it was somewhere a bit further back from that. It was just, you said you were surprised how little was coming right through the system, how much you were losing on the way.
We were right from day one. On this particular swale, we had very large amounts of water being removed. You can see there, although that's just a simple line put through it, those on the left-hand side, that is just after the swale was built and commissioned. And you can see, although there's quite a scatter, and there's a bigger scatter of results there on that particular period, most of the results are well up around the 70% mark right from day one, and that steadily gets better through that period.
So it's higher than what you're modelling, or it exceeded your expectation, basically?
We didn't really know what to expect. I found it very difficult to find hard data, and together with our designers and contractors, we actually set ourselves a fairly conservative level to begin with to see if we could exceed that. And it has done. We just hoped for 50% removal, and actually almost from day one we were at that 70+% removal rate, and it has gone up, as you can see.
That's fantastic. Is that available online anywhere, or have you got a kind of lessons learned sheet that we can...
There is lessons learned sheets on our website. this information possibly is not available online, although I think this presentation will be published. So this will be published, you'll be able to see these graphs.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Fergus.
Okay.